Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President, and I too rise to speak on the Aged Care Amendment Bill, and I would also seek to move a second reading amendment, which I believe has been circulated through the chamber, and I would seek your advice on whether you want me to read the amendment out.
That's fine, Senator Lyons.
Thank you. Well, again, Mr Acting Deputy President, you would know full well that I have very intimate knowledge of the aged care sector as the former Assistant Secretary of United Voice, one of the key aged care unions in this country. And I spent, prior to coming to the Senate, probably 3 years of my working life intimately involved with the Living Longer, Living Better package. And what I can say is it was the most amazing transformation, Mr Acting Deputy President. It was a time, certainly as a long-standing former union official, it was very hard at times to get complete agreement between employers and unions, as you would know yourself. But on the Living Longer, Living Better package, what the unions and the whole of the aged care sector managed to do was to present to government, to the Labor government and to the Minister Butler at the time, a package of amendments that we thought the aged care sector knew. And we did that as a group who came together under an association called the National Aged Care Alliance. And it's got an interesting history, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, because the only other time that employers and unions came together in this place was when the Howard government was in power, and we had Bronwyn Bishop as the aged care minister, who managed to unite the whole sector against her. So the National Aged Care Alliance, of which United Voice was a member and I was the representative on that body for a significant period of time, formed because of the mean-spirited kind of reforms we saw under the Howard government. And the National Aged Care Alliance, which brings together almost every body working right across the aged care sector, whether it's the nursing home sector, whether it's home care, whether it's physios or all of the attendant services, all are members of the National Aged Care Alliance. And that alliance saw an opportunity when the Labor government came into power, saw an opportunity for real change, because as we know, we have an ageing population, and what we do know is that new generations of aged care want to be cared for at home, as indeed older generations and past generations wanted to be cared for at home. We also knew as a sector that the current provisions, whilst there are very fine aged care facilities in our community and there are fabulous community care services, there's just not enough of them. There's just not enough of them. So we knew that was a critical issue. We also knew that low-paid aged care workers was also a critical issue, and it was absolutely amazing to see employers coming together with unions such as United Voice to say to a Labor government, we have to act on wages. If we do everything else in the package, we deliver more facilities, we deliver more options for home care, all of the other wonderful reforms that came out of Living Longer, Living Better, but we don't address the wages, we've done nothing. We won't be able to deliver real reform. So the sector came together and we worked together for 2 or 3 years. We had the Productivity Commission inquiry into aged care, which all of us worked extremely hard on, putting submissions in, meeting with the commissioners. They addressed the National Aged Care Alliance on 2, 3, 4 occasions. Really, the Productivity Commission took the National Aged Care Alliance recommendations to heart. We produced an agreed list of recommendations. There were 20 or 30, I can't remember the precise number, but they were all agreed, and they included addressing the low-paid wages of aged care workers right across the spectrum. And you might ask, quite rightly, Mr Acting Deputy President, why the wages are so low. And of course, historically, this is a sector where we have women workers. The large proportion, and indeed most of the workforce, are women, and historically women's wages have remained behind those of men in equivalent roles in our community. But certainly through my involvement back in the late 1980s, believe it or not, aged care wages were then at a parallel with those in other sectors. But over time, because of women's well-documented ability not to be able to bargain as successfully as male counterparts, and also in a sector where there's not a lot of spare cash around, despite having a very long history of bargaining, and most of the major employers in the aged care sector in Australia are covered by enterprise bargains, they just sit barely above the award, $1 or $2 above the award. And that's because there's not a lot of fat in the system. It's not an industry that runs on big profits. There are profits there, but it's hard slog when you have to sit down and face individual employers across the negotiating table to try and get a better outcome for members. So the award's about $18, $19, $20 an hour for an aged care worker, and of course what really adds to their take-home pay, Mr Acting Deputy President, as you would know, are penalty rates. Penalty rates are an absolute critical part of an aged care worker's take-home pay, because they work outside of normal hours, they work unsociable hours, they work on Saturdays and Sundays, they miss out on time with their families, for which they receive a penalty. And we also know the Abbott government has an agenda that it wants to get rid of penalty rates in this country. Well, we already have a crisis with workers in this country. We already have a crisis of workers, particularly in the aged care workforce. Imagine if you weren't $20 an hour and you work on average 30 hours a week, because aged care workers are not full-time workers. You just couldn't survive. We would see a mass exodus of workers from that sector if the government gets its agenda to downgrade or get rid of penalty rates up and running. I mean, it's out there in the hospitality industry, trying to make that the first cab off the rank. We know retail's under threat, and then there's aged care and all of the other areas where Australian workers earn penalty rates, as they should. If you give up a Sunday when your family is out enjoying each other's company, if you give up that Sunday to supplement a very meagre income, you should be entitled to a penalty. But as I need to put on the record, because I wouldn't want the government to start jumping up and down, Labor isn't opposing these bills, but we do believe that the government has gone way too far in what it's doing. And I've got to say also, Mr Acting Deputy President, that whilst the sector, including the unions, were negotiating and coming up with an agreed set of recommendations, the then opposition were missing in action, completely missing in action on the Living Longer, Living Better package. Nowhere to be seen. Nowhere to be seen. So in the end, they supported the measures because at least they recognise we've got a problem because we've got an ageing population. But I can absolutely say to you, during all of the discussions we had, all of the consultations we had when the National Aged Care Alliance drew up its agreed package, the opposition were nowhere to be seen, took no interest at all in a very significant issue such as aged care in this country. And it is fair to say that the National Aged Care Alliance didn't get everything we want. But those of us who've had lives as union officials know that sometimes, in fact lots of times, you don't always get everything that you want. But we did get up a package of amendments that we continued to support, and they included a better pay for aged care workers. And I've got to say it was one of my proudest moments as a union official to hear employers advocating really strongly to the Labor government that it had to act on wages. And why? Because after that history of 20 or more years of bargaining in the aged care sector, we were just not able to lift the wages to a wage that would provide a good living income. And so what we said to government as a sector, not just unions, and we know how the Abbott government likes to really bash unions at every opportunity. It likes to bash unions. This was an agreed position. This was the position of the National Aged Care Alliance. This was the position of all of the major employers in the country, that government needed to provide a supplement. Now, that supplement, significant amounts of money, all paid for, put in the budget, all there, would have provided about 30 cents an hour on an aged care worker's hourly rate. Now, that isn't a huge amount of money, but what that would have done is lifted that base rate to enable bargaining to add more to that. It wasn't a one-off. It was there to say, well, let's make the hourly rate a certain level. It was about 30 cents more than what aged care workers were getting, 30 cents an hour, and that just lifts the floor so that employers can continue to build on that. It creates a lift, and that's what's needed in the aged care sector, right across the sector. That lift was needed. And, you know, if the Abbott government wants to say it was some dirty deal between a few employers and a few unions in the sector, well, they'd be completely wrong. They'd be completely wrong. Because when we got down to the nuts and bolts of the issue, when the and also, before I get on to that, I'd like to say that the Productivity Commission, most unions would say is probably not a friend of unions, but the Productivity Commission in and of itself said that the aged care workforce wages were very low. And in its document, it also pointed out that if the government did nothing else around this package, it had to do something about wages. So the recognition was there from the employers, from the Productivity Commission and from the unions that wages had to be a central part of a living longer, living better package. So on the Labor government's budget, it put the aged care supplement money in place. And again, the Labor government didn't seek to dictate to the sector about how that money would be apportioned out. It set the challenge for the unions and the employers, through their associations, to sit down under the auspice of an industrial commissioner and work out how to do that. And sure, we had some arguments, but we all know when you negotiate, you win some and you lose some, and there's some fierce arguments along the way. But again, we came out with an agreed position. We came out with an agreed position because the sector itself, employers and unions, were committed to doing something about aged care workers. But again, what we see, of course, is the Abbott government, its ideological push, its hatred of unions, its belief through its Tea Party agenda that individuals need to look after themselves. It just wants to take all of that good work away, all of that agreed process by employers and unions, all of that agreed and hard negotiations that we did with the support of an industrial commissioner. All of that they just want to throw away and go back to a system which has failed in the past, because we know that under the Abbott government we had a system where additional funds were put through an instrument called COPO, and it was supposed to go to workers. And guess what, Mr Acting Deputy President? I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to learn not 1 cent of that money ever found its way into a worker's pocket. And if the government needs another example, it only needs to look at the disability sector in Western Australia, where again the Barnett government made provision for additional wages to be given to disability services workers, but again not through any legislative transparent process, just a direct funding to employers. And well, I can tell you, Mr Acting Deputy President, that's left a very sour taste in the mouths of disability workers who, believe it or not, are even paid less than aged care workers, because that money, not 1 cent of it, went to workers. It went to cars, went to CEOs, but it certainly did not go to workers. And I know that not having a transparent process, a process that employers, aged care employers, signed up to with a designated hourly rate, so completely above board, That's what aged care employers signed up to in this country. But we know just putting the money out there and not requiring any transparency and any accountability will mean that the money will not go into workers' pockets. It will not. Or, alternatively, it'll go into one area of the workforce. What the unions were absolutely agreed upon, and the unions in this sector don't always agree, but what the unions did agree on was that the supplement would be distributed fairly to all of the sector, not just to nurses or not just to aged care workers, but to everyone in the sector, because that's a fair way, that everyone's wages needs to be lifted. But now, if some of this money does find its way to the pockets of workers, you could reward a manager of your aged care facility. They could receive all of this money. There's no guarantee at all that, first, the money will get there, and two, there's no guarantee it will go to the lowest paid. And so we will continue to see, under the Abbott government, an exodus of quality workers. And many of the workers, the aged care workers, nurses and aged care staff who are members of United Voice are amazing people who do the most dedicated jobs of caring for aged care people in our communities, some of the most vulnerable. And Mr Acting Deputy President, these are workers who sit with people in their dying moments. These are workers who have aged care, that the most vulnerable people in our community dying in their arms. That happens on a weekly basis. It happens where the last moments, the last breaths of those in our community in their twilight years, they're witnessed by low-paid aged care workers. And for the Abbott government to be so mean and so ideologically driven that it won't sign up to something that Labor put in place, and that's the reason it won't sign up to it, Labor put in place. But if they've got an issue about that, well, let's look at their history. It was the National Aged Care Alliance who really pushed for these changes, and yes, Minister Butler was a very popular minister, and a minister who listened and a minister who cared. And unfortunately, we're not seeing any of that now. So aged care workforce will continue to be low paid, will continue to have very high turnover at a time when our seniors should be guaranteed that the staff that they get to know and who love them and that they love in return are going to stay there. But the government just doesn't care. And as I say, it was completely absent during the whole of the time that we were negotiating the Living Longer, Living Better package. And to take that funding away from the workforce is a disgrace, and the workforce won't forget that. They know who promised them a fair deal. They know that, and they know that it was Labor who promised them a fair deal, and they know who's taken the money out of their pockets. And don't forget, this comes on top of, so not only are these low-paid workers, but this cruel attack on these workers comes on top of the freezing of superannuation. So we already have this group of workers have low retirement savings, but the Abbott government wants to make them lower. So what will happen in the future is this group of workers will be more reliant on benefits from the government, instead of being able to stand on their own 2 feet, one, with a better wage in aged care, which the Abbott government has stolen from them, and two, with a decent superannuation, which the Abbott government has also stolen from them. Like, talk about not thinking for the future. And of course, if we also look at, I've had a lot of correspondence from aged care employers in Western Australia about the removal of the payroll tax supplement. That's hit them hard. This is a sector that certain parts of it are doing well, but in other areas, many providers are doing a very good service and not making huge profits, as I would argue you shouldn't anyway, but losing that payroll supplement has also hurt. So again, we see an Abbott government with no clear policy on aged care, just its usual same old, let's attack workers, let's hit them in the pockets, and let's just give this money to employers and they can use it as they wish. A disgraceful move. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.